Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Honor the Feminine podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Ledford, and today we have the lovely Shauna Janz with us. As you know, we start each episode with an oracle card. And today, what came forth from the Keepers of the Light oracle cards by Kyle Gray is Gaia for the Earth connection. Be mindful of the planet, come back to Earth, stay grounded. And it's just a beautiful reminder of how Gaia loves, protects, and guides all things, all beings, all animals, the plants. And that invitation to really stay grounded and to know that she's with you. She also brings a mother energy, which feels really up for me right now, so that really resonated. And so we'll step in with an earth connection with Shauna today. So Shauna, welcome.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here.
So share yourself with us. Tell us a bit about you.
Well, how about I share a bit about who I come from and what I do and how I got there a bit.
Yeah, I love that. Those are my favorite journeys.
Awesome. So, I currently reside on the west coast of Canada, Vancouver Island, and I was born and raised here, and I'm on the ancestral lands of the Lekwungen-speaking people. And my people, by way of my ancestors, through my father's side, we are Northern Germanic, coming from Germany, the Netherlands, Sweden, and then down through Poland and Ukraine. And my grandmother's people on this side came over to Kansas when they migrated over, and then eventually ended up in Canada. And then on my grandfather's side, we were settlers into the Canadian prairies in the mid-1900s. So, and then on my mother's side, we are also from Germany and from Scotland. And both grandmother and grandfather's people, longtime settlers in the American Midwest, and then coming into Canada. I'm just the first generation actually to Canada on that side. So that's a little bit about my people and where I come from. And currently, I guess probably about the last 10 years or so of my life, in terms of just my vocational calling in the world, has been working in the field of grief and loss and resiliency and healing in many different capacities. And so I find this work really meaningful, whether it's facilitating workshops and education with youth, or providing one-on-one support, or supporting families after a death happens, or providing support group programs. And then in the last about 3 or 4 years now, bringing in more ritual and community grief rituals in the community here. And then, of course, the ancestral healing work, which is the kind of newest addition and complement to this work I do in the world. And I'm definitely, I try to think about, what ties all that together. And it's about companioning others in their healing and in their wholeness, and how I'm really motivated about how can I help create opportunities where we can feel more deeply connected to ourselves, to each other, and to the more than human world, to spirit. And so that's kind of the through thread of what has been a very meandering, circuitous route to here. Like, I started off in archaeology, it was like so far away from.
You're just digging the bones back then, girl. That's no problem. Now you're just digging the bones in a different way.
It's so funny. It's when I left archaeology, I would kind of cheekily say to people, as much as I loved archaeology, I said, I want to work with people who are living. And so then I went into like the health and social services, and now I feel like I'm full circle because I'm working with the dead again in terms of the ancestral healing work. So full circle.
Well, I want to touch in on, speaking into your ancestors and the way in which I am finding myself, and I know you have for the last couple of years, really orienting ourselves with our people and really speaking into, like, really orienting ourselves with them, and then really speaking into what that is as a way of orienting ourselves on this plane in our world.
Right.
Yeah. And, cause that introduction is not one that my listeners are going to have heard before, right? Is walking through that in that way. And so I really want to name and share how I'm orienting myself more in that way with my people also.
Yes. For me, that journey of reconnecting with my heritage and with my people, I mean, what it is, it's reclaiming my story and my identity and a part of my belonging, which, that's another through thread of all of my work is this profound yearning for belonging that I think so many of us carry, and for different reasons. And reconnecting with our own ancestral origins, our histories, and then our ancestors in the very present in spirit form, I know for me has brought a profound sense of homecoming, of a deeper sense of my own identity, more connection to the specific kind of gifts and birthrights that is my inheritance, and then just the everyday guidance and support in terms of calling in my people and my ancestral guides and feeling that connection with them. And I think this absolutely relates to grief also, both in two different ways. Some of our grief may not be our own and our own lived life experience. It may be inherited, and that has been some of my case. But also on the flip side is that our ancestors and our ancestral origins are also a beautiful holding, that we can offer a certain holding and witnessing for healing through grief and these maybe burdens or traumas that we've experienced. So, doing the ancestral connection in my own life and now offering it to others, it really complements and makes fuller the possibilities for coming into healing and wholeness in community. I'm really about how do we create community? How do we bring back the community and the sacred to our healing? And the ancestors are such a beautiful, important, significant part of that.
Yeah, and I feel like it's a part as the divine feminine has come more online, is more present with us, that one of the variables that has been a lot ignored to this point is those blood lineage ancestors, right? There's been a lot of that feeling around connecting with more spirit guides, which are great and wonderful, but both feels really important to me. And I didn't realize how much of that was missing until I started to work with my blood lineage ancestors and started to feel how much more resourced and supported I am now.
Absolutely. And there's a different, in my experience, there's a different quality of the type of support and connection that comes through when it is our blood ancestors, because they're not just in spirit form, they're in our blood and bones. We embody them also. And so there's a certain quality of familiarity and intimacy that we can connect in with, that it's not better end or anything like that. I mean, I have my spirit guides and helpers also, but it's just a different quality of support. And, as someone who also very much kind of has a therapy informed lens in terms of my work, I think, what allows us to be resilient in our times. And sometimes the image that comes up for me is an image of a trampoline. And a trampoline is only buoyant if it has enough spokes holding it up. And so I think, when I'm approaching supporting others, or I think about my own life, I say, well, what are the spokes that are holding up our trampoline? And whether that be very kind of this world incarnate like support, or our spiritual support and our ancestors. And that's, that's one of the important spokes or springs that's holding up our ability to be resilient and healthy and to be responsive in our life.
Yeah. I love that visual.
I do too. I do enjoy it. And a lot of people, especially the kids that I work with, they really enjoy it also.
Well, there's something too, like if there's only a couple of spokes, you can still jump on that thing, but not to the heights and not with the safety or the support.
Right. Totally.
So good. Can you talk to us a little bit about how some of the grief ritual work works? Starting from this sense of our culture tends, I'm just going to say, not to grieve well.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, I want to name that foundation first. And then maybe if you can speak into, ways to do that better.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And you'll have to stop me because I get going and I'll just keep going. But let's name that foundation. Absolutely. And when I say this culture, my lived experiences in our Western North American capitalist culture. And so I'm referring to that when I say this culture, Western culture. And I think we definitely have become untethered from our ability to be with ourselves and each other through pain and grief. And I think we live in this culture that is quick to pathologize and to make us feel wrong or worthless if we're not somehow being productive, if we're not somehow doing. And that productivity. So it's like, of course, grief is stigmatized because grief moves at the pace of a sloth. And our culture wants us to move perpetually at the pace of a cheetah who's in mid-hunting mode running after an antelope, right? So, of course, there's no room for grief. Of course, it gets a bad rap, and there's a lot of myths and messages still that are really prevalent about you just need to get over it, you need to get on with life, and et cetera, et cetera. So just, naming that because it's real. And I think it informs both when I see individuals or I'm doing community grief rituals. Oftentimes, some of the places we need to start is to bring some awareness to what are the stories that we are carrying within ourselves that maybe we've been socialized with about how grief should or shouldn't look. And sometimes those need to be broken down because grief has a very natural movement towards healing, and it's about us kind of getting out of the way and allowing it to happen. And one thing that I often is like a touch point is reminding ourselves that grief is relational. Grief was never meant to be done alone behind closed doors. Grief was never meant to stay locked up in our rib cages. Grief has the motion and the yearning to move. And so if grief is relational, it's also deeply tied to our sense of belonging and intimacy in the world, right? Yeah. If we allow our grief, it's because we have been allowing ourselves to be in relation. And so oftentimes we think of grief, we think of the death of a loved one. Absolutely. But we can also think of it in broader terms. And, I think of the card you pulled, Mother Gaia. Think about the grief for our earth. And in order to really feel our grief, it means we're actually in connection with her. It means we're actually allowing our hearts to remain open to both the joy and the beauty, but also the profound grief and anxiety that is a normal response to what's happening in our world right now. And so for me, like that is why I find grief really important. I feel like it's just one pathway and gateway into our ability to feel true belonging and connection. And that grief is an intimate expression of our belonging. Joanna Macy, who's a a Buddhist and eco-psychologist and well-known. She has a quote, and I actually have it up on my wall over here because it feeds my soul. And the quote is, when we allow our hearts to break open, it can hold the entire universe. Oh. And yeah, do we just let that kind of sink in? And grief is our love. We have on one hand love and gratitude and joy, and on the other hand we have grief and pain. But they are two sides of the same coin. Or we bring our hands together in prayer, and to feel the exquisiteness of life and connection and intimacy means that, of course, we're going to feel grief. But grief is an expression of our belonging, our connection, and our love. And from this place, ritual, coming into ritual, how does ritual feed us? Because grief is relational, I see the reclaiming of ritual and creating intentional space in our lives as a way of allowing that grief movement and relationship. So one of my teachers and someone I really look up to is Francis Weller, and he's a psychotherapist, and I think he lives in Northern California. And what I learned from him, he has this beautiful understanding that grief needs two things. It needs release, but it also needs containment and witnessing, right? And so that can happen in many different ways. But the understanding here is that grief, if let's say I'm on my own and I'm deep in grief and I'm not calling in any support, or there's no one else there, there's no container, what happens is my grief may get released, but it has nowhere to go to be transformed. And so it kind of gets recycled back up. Whereas the containment can be met in many different ways. Really, that word is also meaning it needs to be witnessed. It needs relationships to be fed into. And so ritual is one way that we can do that, whether it's I'll give a very personal example. So in my community here, I've been about twice a year, I hold a community grief ritual. And it's not only bringing community together so that we can witness each other, and that's a part of the container, but it's also calling in a ritual space, calling in all that which supports us. So our deeply well ancestors, our spirit helpers, calling in the mystery. That's bringing in relationship. We bring in these relationships. Our grief is not only released, it's then transformed. It has movement. It has somewhere to go because it's in this net of relationship with mystery, with spirit, with each other. So let me pause there because I'll just keep going.
No, but I think it's so beautiful to recognize the paradox between release and containment, right? Because those sound separate.
Yeah.
Like on opposite ends of a spectrum. Oh, you release. Oh, you contain.
Right.
Needing both simultaneously.
Yeah.
And I loved when you talked about a release without some containment and witnessing just gets recycled back up. That makes so much sense to me, and I haven't thought about it like that before.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, we're seeing that in this Western culture is where we're losing the spaces and the understandings, and we're reclaiming them. And I feel really hopeful about that. But there has been an untethering. And so what happens when grief doesn't have the containment? And, we're definitely living in a time that, I mean, I think part of the conversation or something that definitely needs to be mentioned is that, yes, grief is good. And that also, that release looks different for everyone. Everyone has a different capacity in terms of their body, their nervous system, of what grief will look like. And so grief is good, and we need to nurture that in safe and healthy ways, which can look different for different people. And when I work with people who are also experiencing trauma, it's different. It's like grief and trauma have two very different energies in our body. Yeah. Grief yearns towards. So an example being You want to see the picture of your loved one up on the mantle. Grief yearns, it's missing, it's yearning, and it's a movement towards. But if our loss is also we're having a traumatic response to it, trauma has the opposite energy in our bodies. It's saying, no, I can't see the picture. It's too much, and we move away. And so when we are someone who's experiencing grief, but it's a traumatic loss and we have trauma in our bodies, we are actually embodying two conflicting energies, which can be really confusing. And in those situations, it's the trauma that needs to be responded to first. The self-soothing, the coming back into regulated nervous system before the grief can be like really focused on in a more direct way. Does that make sense?
Oh God, you're blowing my mind. Yes, it made perfect sense, and it explains, like it helps me have a context for what's going on. I mean, I've called grief enigmatic for years, really enigmatic in the way that it shows up differently for different people. It shows up for an individual differently over time. I think there's a lot to be said still about, that racing through it, because my experience of it is that it shows up in one way sort of initially, and then over time it shows up in different ways.
Yes. And that just speaks beautifully to the rhythms and movement of grief. And so I often, the images that come to me is when a loss first happens, it can be like a huge boulder being placed on our shoulders, like the weight of the world, right? That expression. And we are crushed by it. We are on the ground. We are flattened. We cannot move. We can hardly breathe underneath the pressure and the pain of that loss. And our culture right now wants to just take that boulder right off of us, go bury it somewhere, and say, move on. Whereas the movement of grief is saying, we learn how to carry that boulder differently through time. And so I'm crushed for a while underneath that boulder. But let's say eventually my body starts growing some muscles and some strength that I didn't know I had. And eventually I'm able to kind of get up on my knees. And then I have some community of friends that come and they help lift the boulder up so I can actually eventually stand under it. But it's still just as big. And maybe it's still blocking the sun out, but I can stand. And then possibly someone comes along and says, wow, like I can relate to a boulder that big. And I actually see that there's some flakes of shale that want to actually come off at the back. May I gently brush them off? Sure. And so our boulder kind of comes a bit smaller. And then we continue on, but it's still big. And maybe eventually I can develop a pulley and strap system that allows it, rather than, crinking my neck over, I can hold it a bit more balanced on my body. And then we go through our days, and weather and storms happen, and eventually the boulder kind of starts wearing away and maybe starts changing shape slightly, but it still has weight. We're still carrying it. And we may have friends and community and our spiritual guidance and support come along and help to carry it, help to shape it over time. And maybe eventually we get to the point where that boulder, we can actually take it off our back, and it's something that we can hold in our hands. Or it's something that eventually we say, you know what, today I'm going to leave this boulder at home, but I'll be back. Like I'll be back this evening to tend to it still. Or we may keep it in our like heart pocket and bring it out at specific times when it becomes something we want to share with someone else and becomes a way of connecting and understanding. But we always carry it. And that shows the living movement of grief. And if we live in a culture that doesn't want to allow us that process, what are we being robbed of? What are we being bereft of? It's like a double burden of grief, is that if we're not actually allowed our grief to move in the ways that it yearns for and to come into a place of remembering and honoring and connection, then we're being bereft yet again of that possibility, of that opportunity.
Whew. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I love this. Our relationship with it changes, and it transforms simultaneously. It's beautiful. Can you talk a little bit about, I feel like there's a bit of an elephant in the conversation around, but we don't know how to do it anymore. Like, is there this innateness that we do know how to do it and that we're remembering it? Are there ways to activate that? I have this sense of...
I think it's more, I think there's something about the innateness and it being there. It's more like, what obstacles do we have to remove to allow it just to do its thing?
Yeah, okay.
I think that feels like it resonates. So, we're doing this by bringing in ritual that allows a certain, here's a story that may actually speak to this a little bit. So there was an individual who came to one of the community grief rituals, and they had never been to one before. They were super cautious, and it took a lot of courage for them to show up. And they participated, didn't show a lot of emotion, didn't during the apex of the ritual, didn't actually kind of go to the altar, which is totally fine, but just was like kind of just taking things in. And as myself, as someone who's leading it, I was like, oh, what's happening for this person? And I checked in afterwards, and it was just all new for them. And it was apparent in what they shared that when they came in, they had a lot of the storylines about, my parent just died, I need to just get over it. I should just be kind of putting it in a box and just moving away from it. And so part of me was like, was a ritual beneficial for them? And what happens is sometimes in ritual, and I'm learning this more and more, is that it continues to work on us afterwards. And so
by definition.
So this person did end up reaching out afterwards and came to see me. And we just saw each, individually, as an individual session, and just twice. And it was just so beautiful, because what this ritual did is it helped remove those storylines. And with a little bit of encouragement and affirmation from me, just sitting there and listening and being like, absolutely, they now have an altar in their home. They are now going through old family recipes and baking their grief and offering food. And this is a natural movement and yearning. And it felt a little bit awkward at first and weird, but now I'm just like, I love it. And their grief now has movement, and it's relational. And so even though in the moment of the grief, like the afternoon of the grief ritual, I left being like, oh, did that meet the needs of this person? It's like, oh, it did, but it continued to work on them. But I think that could be an example of how sometimes it's just removing some of the constructs or socialization or the shoulds that we think grief should or shouldn't look like, to question them and to clear those, and then to just kind of trust the movements and the power of intuition also that comes in about what to do with this. And so, the fact that this person is now, they just naturally were drawn to going through family recipes, and part of that is baking. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful story. So I think it's about not so much needing to add something in, but to take away barriers.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak a little bit into your lived experience of grief and how it created the journey for you to doing this kind of work, like the why of it all,
Mm-hmm. I've been reflecting on this more and more, and of course, in my own healing journey and experience, the patterns start to emerge more and more. Mm-hmm. And for me, I always had a bit of a pervasive, intangible sense of grief, and I see in my own life kind of three experiences or themes of where grief has really been my experience. So one being just the very real coming into embodied form into this life. I feel tender just speaking it. There's still a sweet grief around coming out of spirit form and into an embodied lived form. And so a bit of a, maybe some people call it spiritual abandonment, feeling like that kind of wounding, or spiritual bereft. And how I've kind of navigated that is, I mean, ever since I was a young child, my connection with the stars and the connection with the universe and with spirits and has always been very strong. And it's by refining and coming into even more conscious and direct relationship with spirit that I've been able to kind of navigate that grief and carry it in different ways. And what I've come to learn in terms of that specific type of grief in my life is now starting to recognize that there's a lot of exquisiteness in that separation, because it's in that separation that we come to know intimacy of who we are in this world in a way that we wouldn't have if we didn't unmerge in the first place. Right? I think it's Carl Sagan that says something like, we are here so the universe can know itself. And so that feels very resonant in terms of how I hold this type of grief in my own life. So I want to name that, because I think it took me a long time for me to name that and to understand what this pervasive grief was. And it's just, the grief of coming into an embodied kind of separate form. And now I'm totally committed to being in this form, and it's great, but it took a while to fully accept it. Great.
Yeah.
So, the other area of my life is from just childhood and adolescent trauma. And so navigating and healing through the grief of that. And I think that experience definitely exacerbated a sense of not belonging. And so one of the through threads of my work is definitely this sense of belonging. And, as I spoke before, like the intimacy of grief and belonging. And again, as I've been doing my own healing work for my own lived experiences in this way, there is a sense that sometimes it's in those things that we never felt or received that we actually come to know them even more intimately than if we'd had them all along, right? Mm-hmm. And so this yearning for belonging and connection has definitely been a motivating force in my life to be of service, and also a well of grief for me. And again, of course, that's also attached to the first theme of just coming into embodied form. So they're related. And then in my more recently, it's this ancestral connection and recognizing that so even when I kind of got a handle on the spiritual grief and my lived life, my early childhood grief, there was still something that wasn't shaking. And I couldn't name it. And then it's like, oh, ancestral grief. And the very realness that there was very much so some unmetabolized and unresolved grief, specifically through my father's side, which I wasn't really connected to, but I learned, some more of our history in terms of, we came from a Mennonite tradition, which I never knew of. And when I trace back the history of those in a Mennonite belief system, which came about in the 1500s, there was such a long history of persecution and migration because it not being accepted by the larger socially sanctioned religious beliefs. And then so there's the grief of those migration patterns, which then culminated. I never knew my grandfather. He died before I was born, and same with my grandmother. But I just learned, about 2 years ago that my grandfather, when he was 17, and my great-grandfather, they were in the Ukraine at that time during the Bolshevik Revolution, and they barely made it out alive. They had to flee. They were bargaining with the train operator, they barely made it out. My aunt's partner was killed in front of them. And so they're in survival mode. They come over to, Saskatchewan, the Canadian prairies, and it's about survival. They left behind everything. Mm-hmm. And I started to unearth some of those stories and recognizing that's the other pervasive grief that I could never quite get to. And since doing ancestral work, not only did my cognitive intellectual understanding of this history, but then working in spirit with the healing of the lineages, that has dissipated in a really profound way, which is amazing. So here we are back again at the ancestors, through our ancestral lineages, we may be carrying grief that is not in our own lived life experience, but comes through our lineages, but also our lineages are a source of tremendous healing potential also and support. So that, that was a big component. That was a big thread of grief that is now has a home, really. And it finally had the movement that it's been seeking for generations that it didn't get because the resources weren't there, survival mode was there, trauma was there, you name it. And then plus the untethering of our capacity to be with it. And so part of my inheritance was to help heal that and to give it movement so it could actually be transformed.
Yeah. And that just brings us full circle from where we started. Gorgeous.
Yeah.
Gorgeous.
Yeah, no, thank you for asking that. It's not always that I, get to speak about my own kind of entry into this work. And I used to, because it's not super tangible losses, like of course I've had death in my life, absolutely, and grief for that, but it's these larger kind of three themes in my life that has brought me to where I am now, and also brought me to the capacity to really hold a lot for people, and to be a witness and a companion for others in deep pain and grief.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful way to think about it. Yeah. So, my love, are you ready for the random question?
Oh, bring on the random question.
So the first one is, do you have a favorite song of the moment?
Oh, favorite. So, I should, because I'm a musician. And honestly, I don't have a favorite song of the moment, but what I do often is I turn on music at night and I dance. And so I have a very strong connection with music, and speaking about ancestral stuff, I mean, it's not only the grief that came through, it's the musical abilities. And so picking up a guitar when I was 20 and intuitively learning how to play and becoming a musician, that is a way that I feel connected. And those are some of the gifts that have come through that line. Yeah. So I just want to name that because that was really important. And so favorite song, no, but music is close to my heart, and I'm often dancing to music at night. Yeah.
And I know that mine often change about what's up in a moment, but do you have a favorite ritual of the moment?
Right now, I'm really enjoying. So I've just moved into a more rural area, which I love. And right now, I put a lot of dedication and time and enjoyment in getting to know the land here and getting to know the spirits of this place, the ancestors of this place. So I get out into the natural landscape around me a lot, and I make offerings, and I'm talking to the more than human world and making relationships and introducing myself and praising and singing to the tree people and the streams. So I have found a beautiful spot that is really welcoming that I'll often go to and just sit and give praise and gratitude and listen.
Beautiful. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me, my love, how do we reach out and connect with you?
Oh, please do. So my website, ShaunaJanz.com. So Shauna with a U, JANZ.com. Of course, those will be in the notes too. And if you're interested in the music, ShaunaJanzmusic.com. It's definitely one of the ways that I honor and stay in connection with some of my people. So yes, and please do reach out. I would love to hear from anyone. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll have all of those links on the show notes for this episode over at honorthefeminine.com. So very easy way to get to you. Shauna, thank you for today.
Oh, thank you. It's been such a joy. Yeah, I appreciate the space to have this kind of conversation.
Hello again, everyone. I loved being with Shauna and talking about grief and the way we deal with grief and our ancestors and the way they weave with us. It was just so great to be with her. If you want to connect with Shauna, you can get to the links over on the show notes for this episode at honorthefeminine.com. Also, I will be doing the final shame game episode in the next episode, episode 108. So I'm going to sit down and record the final episode in that series. Additionally, if you'd like to work with me, there will be some opportunities in the fall. I'm going to run some one-on-ones through the Fire Activation series and also a group program called the Down and Dirty Podcast course for those wanting to podcast and, share their voice in a new way and express their truth. And so if any of that makes you tingle a little or has you curious, you can go over to Honor the Feminine to the Work With Me tab and share your email with me, and I can send you information about that as it becomes available late summer, early fall. Finally, subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts. We have some amazing interviews coming up that I don't want you to miss. All right, everyone, have a great day.